Welcome back to my channel. My name is Shane Fleming. I'm a property consultant based here in Dublin. I use this channel to provide information and insight into the property market here in Ireland, also what it's like to work in the real estate industry, as well as some helpful tips about buying and selling and investing in property. If these are topics that do interest you, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. In this video, I'm going to discuss the current property market. I'm going to touch a little bit on commercial, but I will focus on residential, and I'll also kind of focus on the issues that you have with looking at average prices in terms of trying to determine value. First, let's get commercial out of the way. I do think it's important to kind of highlight what's going on in the commercial market because it will have an impact on the overall market as well. Because if the commercial market falls dramatically, it will have an impact on confidence within the whole property market. Also, it will have an impact on long-term development. I have said in previous videos as far back as March that the office and retail market could be badly affected this year and could come down as much as 10 to 20%. I believe that's already started to happen, and definitely the market has fallen by at least 10%, if not more, in some sectors. I did look at a property at the start of the year just for one example. I've numerous different examples of this, but one example, I did look at an office investment at the start of the year being guided 12.5 million. It's now being guided 9.5 million. So that just emphasizes the drop in the office market. I also said back in March that development land could fall as much as 50% if the end values fell as much as 20%. I'm already seeing that actually happening. I did look at a site at the start of the year. It was being guided 2.5 million, and that did kind of seem to stack up from residential purposes. However, now the top offer on that property is, or that development site, is 1.4 million. And again, when I redo a development appraisal, that's the max you could possibly put on it at the moment. There is a total lack of transactions actually happening within the commercial market, and that has led to some major firms having to let a number of people go. But it's not all bad within the commercial sector. I did say at the start of the year, and perhaps even last year, that industrial will probably do reasonably well, and it has continued to do reasonably well with the onset of more and more online sales and online retail. So moving on to residential, which I think probably most of you actually want to know more about the residential market than the commercial market, but moving on to residential. Some of you may have seen headlines in the papers recently in the last few days or last week based on MyHome data that has come out stating that prices have gone up nationally by 5.1%, and in Dublin prices have gone up by 2.5%. I believe these headlines are very misleading, and I will get into it later on in the video why I believe that. But I also have seen other experts in the field or within the property field advising that actually prices could go up even further next year, and I just don't quite understand where they are pulling that data from that prices will go up next year. I do not believe the lack of supply will be enough to counter other economic factors at play, including high unemployment, lower GDP. As well, I do hope that the banks will continue to lend, but definitely the restrictions in regards to exemptions will have an impact on people's borrowing powers next year. So let's talk about My Home and the reports that came out recently in the last few weeks stating that the national housing prices have gone up by 5.1%. As an agent, I actually get that report a few days before the press get it, and I had a review of it. I looked over the figures, but I still don't quite understand how they're determining that prices have gone up by 5.1% nationally. They are based on asking prices. As I said before in other videos, I do not think it's a good idea to base kind of an average, national average in terms of how the property market is performing on asking prices. But when the report actually came out, I actually did look at My Home, and I looked at some of the properties that I've been kind of tracking over the last number of weeks as well to see what was actually happening with them. But if you are on myhome.ie, you will see that at the bottom of the section of the property that you're looking for, they will provide some additional market data. And in that market data, they will let you know what the price corrections have been in that area over the last 3 months. So I'm actually going to pop them up on the screen right now, but quickly looking at them. So when I was looking at them, I looked firstly at Ranelagh. It said that in Ranelagh over the last 3 months, this data was captured kind of a few days ago, but in the last 3 months, there's been 3 price increases, 10 price decreases, and overall a decrease of 2%. And looking at the Dublin 6 area, we are looking at 17 price increases and 68 price decreases. And overall in Dublin 6, a decrease of 4%. And then if I go on and look at other property locations or other locations within Dublin, Inchicore was actually probably one of the only ones I found that actually went up. In total, 10 price increases, 8 decreases, and overall of a 5% increase. However, when you look at Dublin 8, where Inchicore is based, there was 32 increases and 84 decreases, and an overall decrease of 2%. And I suppose then you looked at what I thought would be a popular enough area in Portobello. 0 increases, 11 decreases, and a total decrease of 5%. Again, we've discussed Dublin 8. Looking at Kimmage, 3 increases, 10 decreases, and overall of a 5% decrease. And looking at South Dublin, 138 increases and nearly 400 decreases, with an overall decrease of 3%. Shankill was similar as well. 0 increases, 6 decreases, a 5% decrease overall. The IFSC, 1 increase, 10 decreases, an overall decrease of 6%. Dublin 1, 6 increases, 39 decreases, and an overall decrease of 6%. I actually had a look at all the different markets that not every single market, but nearly every market, and I looked at every county as well. I saw similar trends that in each county there was a decrease over the last 3 months of at least 3 to 5%. The only 2 counties where there was an actual increase, which kind of went against the trend here, was Kerry and Donegal. And obviously there is this whole kind of increased movement of work from home, which I do not believe is for the long term. So if there are kind of artificial price increases in locations such as Kerry or Donegal, I would be a bit wary that in 2 or 3 years' time, where people come back and move back to the cities, that those increases just weren't justified. But be careful on that one. But that's a different video altogether. So let's just think about other data sources other than myhome.ie, which a lot of their reports are actually based on asking prices, which again, I don't think is a great way to review the market. But in terms of sales prices, the most accurate data we have is from the CSO. However, that data is at least kind of 5 to 6 months out of date, because it just takes a long time from actually going sale agreed, getting contracts signed, and then the CSO figures are only actually based on stamping, which could be a number of months after you've gone sale agreed and contracts have been signed. So I think that data could definitely be 5 to 6 months out of date, but it has stated that property prices have fallen from this time last year by 0.6%. Let's look at another data source which some agents have access to, which is IPI. It's a good data source. It has all the properties that are on the market as well as all the past sales as well. So let's hop in and have a look at that right now. So this is my setup here. I have it actually on my market. I have it set up for Dublin. So it's really just showing me my Dublin data here on my dashboard. It's telling me that at the moment there is just over 4,000 homes for sale within Dublin. A slight increase on the number of available homes since last month of nearly 4%. and 15% over the last 6 months, which is understandable considering lockdown, etc. So it is understandable that supply has come up slightly in the last few months. Then looking at the average price that we have on the market right now across all of Dublin, this is taking account of all properties that are on the market in Dublin, where the data is suggesting that the asking price has fallen by 3% since last month, or 0.9% in the last 6 months. But I kind of want to talk about the averages and how they can be a bit misleading. So I'm going to look at sales prices. So I've set this up for Dublin, all properties within Dublin last year. So this is all of 2019. There was just over 18,000 properties sold, and the average price across all of Dublin was 426,000. When you look at that across the year in terms of volumes of sales, we're really looking at 1,400 to 1,600 sales per month across the year. Bear that in mind for when we look at this year. Also, in terms of average prices, we are talking about going anywhere from 421,000 up to a peak of 448,000. So that's how much properties can trend differently from month on month. So I think it is important to realise that some months you may get some very nice properties that have sold, which will increase the average, and other months perhaps there was a lower volume of one bed sold, and that can actually decrease it. So looking at prices across the board on purely an average basis is not the greatest way to look at an individual price being sold or house being sold. Also, if I just scroll down here, I'll see that the average price per square meter. So we'll have a look at that again. So let's go and have a look at this year. So I'll just click the last 12 months and hopefully, so over the last 12 months, there's been 14,000 properties sold. If you just look at this year alone, probably you're talking close to about 10, because we've about another 2 months left in this year. The average, what's the average? So the average has gone up slightly this year. Again, not a great thing to be looking at averages. The volumes of sales obviously have dropped off. Again, started reasonably consistent the first or end of last year, then dropped off a little bit. And then we had lockdown and stuff. So obviously transactions nearly halved. In terms of the average price achieved, okay, so I think this is kind of an important one to look at. So the average price that was achieved at the start of this year was 450,000. The average price of a property being sold right now, completed sales being registered right now, is 420,000. That's a 30 grand difference in the average. But again, I'm saying these averages aren't the greatest way to determine a value of one particular property. And I'll explain that further. So here I am going to look at some of the properties that are on the market right now and see how someone could easily manipulate percentages of uplifts or down decreases if they wanted to, depending on the data. But I'm not trying to manipulate anything here. I've just literally just picked 100 properties. So all these properties are on sale at the moment. They've recently been put on the market. I've taken the first 100 that are there in Dublin. I've decided to focus on 3 beds. And I have popped them into a spreadsheet. So I'm going to look at each one of them from an average point of view. So what we have here is we have a selection, just a random selection of 100 properties. The first 100 properties that came up. These figures here are in the hundreds of thousands. Obviously that's 1 million and that is 2 million. But these are 3 beds, and the average of the prices of all of them would be 432,000. And that's not far off where we were thinking the average would be. So this 100 is a reasonable reflection of where the market is in terms of what we thought the average would be. But let's just quickly have a think about what actually was mentioned in the My Home report. So in the My Home report, one of the things that they actually mentioned was stock levels were down 25%. So if I decide to take, let's just take, for example, the top 75 of these, which we're taking out 25% of a stock level, and I put it here. And I decide to work out what the average is. It's the same data, it's the same selection of properties minus a random 25 have been deselected. And we're coming to an average of 430. So in this example, there is only a difference of £2,000 between them. However, what happens if I do it a slightly different way? What happens if I take it from the bottom and go up and take out 25 that aren't actually in it? So I'll take out the top 25, copy these, move them here. So now I have a different average. So it was the same data minus 25 from the top, which only reduced, or 25 from the bottom, reduced in a very similar average price. However, if I took the sample of 75 properties from bottom to top, it actually resulted in a totally different average of 445. And comparing the two, there is a €15,000 difference in that average. That would mean that there is roughly around a kind of 3 or 4% difference in the price. Same data, I've just taken two different samples. So using averages is not the best way for looking at property, and I kind of will go into that in a bit more detail in the next bit. So in this next section, what I want to do is actually focus in on what normally happens in valuations. So I'm a chartered valuer. Generally speaking, do a good bit of commercial valuations and a small bit of residential valuations. In commercial valuations, a huge amount of what you do is actually based on the lease, as well as looking at yields and different formulas to calculate what the end value of a property might be. From a residential point of view, I've discussed this before in the past, that most residential valuations is based on comparable evidence based on recent sales that have happened within an area. This is not going to be a perfect example, but it's just going to illustrate a little bit difference when you focus in on a particular area, or when you focus in on one property, what actually is happening in the market itself, rather than looking at just a not a global, but a national average in terms of price increases or decreases. So let's just kind of hop back in here. So what I have done here again in IBI is I've selected just any random property. It's a property in Belmont. It's not actually a property, I've just selected the area. I've selected this area because I did buy a house in this area a few years ago and sold it last year. And I know the area pretty well. I grew up not too far away from it either, up in Dublin Mountain. So I've just selected this area because I know it reasonably well. So what I've done is I have entered details in for an average size 4-bed house of 114 square meters as an average size. Up here you'll see that it's just right there. And I've selected similar properties, a huge amount of similar properties within the area that have sold for the last 2 years. So based on all the data or all the properties that I've selected, it is telling me that the average price, or the price based on a square footage that should be reasonably achieved for this property, is 525,000. But what I want to do is I want to go down the bottom here, and if you bear with me for a minute, you might actually, because you'll keep an eye here on the top, in regards to the suggested price here. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect any property that hasn't sold in 2020. So I'm just going to go up the list of all the properties that I felt were relevant, that were similar sizes, and I'm going to deselect every single one. So as you will see on the properties, I've deselected every property that doesn't relate to 2020. And you will see what has happened to the suggested price based on a square footage price per square foot. So what has happened here is that the price has dropped from 512 down to nearly 469, purely based on the properties that have sold this year. So that just gives you an idea of perhaps what has actually happened in the last year or two, and it also illustrates the differences between when you just use averages. If you actually deselect, or you're selective in the properties you actually put into your database. I think this is a fair reflection in my mind of what's actually happened in the area. What I might do here is I will include properties that are for sale now, and go down to have a look in more detail on what is actually on sale here. So see the ones in green, they're properties that are for sale within the development. They are very similar, in line with what is being suggested here as a reasonable price for the property. So they are two properties that have an asking price in line or there or thereabouts with this selection. Obviously square footages might be different and there might be a lot of other differences, but the red ones are ones that have sold, mainly sold in the last year or two, but you will definitely see that there is a drop in price. This is not perfect. It's not the right way I would do a valuation. I'd have to look at it in far more detail to do a valuation, but this just gives you, it illustrates the problem with just using averages to determine values when you look at average from a whole Dublin area, or you look at it from a national area. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit more in regards to where the market is going, especially if you are taking out sales from last year, what has happened to the average. And I think that is a fair illustration of what I believe is happening in the market right now. I believe the prices are coming down. I will be the first to admit that prices are slightly rising for some selected properties. If they're 3-4 beds with a large garden, have an option for an office, etc., in good locations, definitely there is very high demand for them and prices are slightly going up. However, I don't think the market as a whole is increasing. I definitely think there's a lot of evidence out there that actually suggests that the market is falling slightly, in some cases anywhere between 8 to 10%. I do not believe My Home's use of asking prices as an indicator of where property values are is a good indicator, and it's a flawed method. If residential prices remain the same or even go up, I really believe they do not provide any good value, and from an international point of view, we go even higher up on the unaffordable scale as well. So I just don't see prices going up this time next year. While the World Bank and the IMF are predicting a global recession next year and predicting negative growth of up to 10% for Europe, I just don't see the Central Bank of Ireland actually reducing lending restrictions that are in place right now. I actually think that's going to have a negative impact on values next year. If you think about it, if there are not exemptions allowed for borrowers next year, and people can only borrow at 3.5% of their salaries rather than maybe 4.5 times their salaries, that is definitely going to have a negative impact on values next year. It could mean for a couple who have a salary of 100,000, that lack of exemptions could mean that their borrowing power is down as much as 100 grand. I do believe prices are coming down. As I mentioned before already, I am seeing examples of price decreases in the area where I'm based in Dublin City. of anywhere between kind of 8 and 10%. I've seen decreases of 100 grand on properties that have been on the market for over a year, and they're only coming down now. And some of those decreases are as much as 100,000. If you're not following them already, make sure you follow Crazy House Prices over on Instagram. They have over 400 decreases, market decreases in the last few months that they've posted. So that's a good source of reference for the general public. In summary, commercial has come down, development sites are coming down. Industrial has remained stable enough. I don't believe that average prices or average asking prices are a good way to indicate value for a particular property. Sadly, I believe there's a lot of economic factors at play that are going to result in price decreases next year. I do hope you found this video of some use. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. The next video I'm going to do will probably be a good bit shorter, but I will do a video on how to view properties during this current lockdown. As I said, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribing to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.